A single spotlight, a stage so vast it swallows you whole, and a young man standing in the middle of it all completely alone. The crowd is silent. The judges are watching. Millions of people at home are leaning closer to their screens. He opens his mouth and everything stops, not because it was perfect, but because it was painful. Because every single note he sang that night carried something that had no business being on a talent show stage. It carried grief. It carried years of silence. It carried a truth he had never spoken out loud until that moment. Simon Cowell, a man who has heard it all, seen it all, and been moved by almost nothing, leaned forward. The crowd erupted. Social media went into a frenzy overnight. Within hours, millions of people were watching, sharing, crying. Everyone wanted to know the same thing: who is Matty Juniosa? But what happened next changed everything. Because the story behind that performance, the real story, was nothing like the fairy tale the world had started to write for him. Behind the applause, behind the viral clips and the glowing headlines, Matty Juniosa was holding onto something dark, something that had been building inside him for years. Something the cameras never caught and the headlines never told. This is the full truth, and once you hear it, you'll never see that moment the same way again. Matty Juniosa grew up feeling like he didn't quite fit, not in his school, not in his social circles. Not in a world that seemed to reward loudness and confidence, two things that never came naturally to him. What came naturally was feeling, deeply, almost painfully. And somewhere in the middle of all that emotion, he found music. It wasn't a hobby, it was a lifeline. While other kids his age were listening to whatever was trending, Matty was drawn to something older, something heavier. Songs that felt like they'd been written by people who had survived something. Ballads with weight, melodies that made you sit still. He didn't just listen to music, he lived inside it. People noticed early: teachers, family. Friends who'd catch him humming something under his breath and stop to listen without saying a word. There was always this quiet consensus: this boy is different, this boy has something. But recognition and opportunity are not the same thing. The road to Britain's Got Talent wasn't paved with encouragement and open doors. It was filled with closed ones. Rejections he never talked about, nights where he questioned whether any of it was worth it. He wasn't polished. He hadn't been groomed by industry coaches or trained in elite performance academies. He was just real, completely uncomfortably real. And when he finally walked out onto that BGT stage, the nation saw exactly that. A young man at a crossroads, desperate to be heard. Terrified of being dismissed, carrying a story that was far too big for the few minutes the show was giving him. The clip spread like wildfire, comments poured in. People said they'd never felt so emotional watching a stranger perform. His name trended for days. Interviews were requested. Brands came calling. Everyone wanted a piece of him. But here's the thing about overnight fame that no one warns you about. It doesn't heal what's broken, it just illuminates it. After the audition, the world saw a star rising. What they didn't see was what was happening behind closed doors. Matty wasn't sleeping, he was barely eating. The weight of suddenly being watched, judged, discussed by millions of strangers had settled onto his shoulders like something physical, something crushing. And it wasn't just the pressure of the competition. It was something far more personal than that. Because the song he'd chosen for that audition, it wasn't chosen for its catchiness. It wasn't chosen because it showed off his range or fit what the judges were looking for. It was chosen because it was him, every lyric, every pause. Every note was autobiographical in a way that only he fully understood. Matty had been living with mental health challenges long before anyone knew his name. Anxiety that sat on his chest like a stone. Emotional lows that came without warning and stayed without permission. A profound, exhausting sense of being different from everyone around him, even in a room full of people who claimed to love him. Music had always been where he could put all of that down. Where he didn't have to explain it or justify it or make it presentable. He could just feel it. But now the very thing that had been his sanctuary was being turned into a performance. And not just any performance. A performance that had to happen again and again, under brighter lights, in front of bigger crowds, with more at stake every single time. And that's when things started to quietly fall apart. People who were close to him during this period described a version of Matty that the public never got to see. Withdrawn, unreachable. Someone who could switch on the warmth and charisma for a camera and then go completely dark the moment it stopped rolling. Cancellations started happening. Conversations went unanswered. And behind the scenes, the people who cared about him were asking questions that nobody in the machine of the show seemed particularly interested in answering. Was he okay? Was anyone actually checking? The competition kept moving because that's what it does. It doesn't slow down for uncertainty, it doesn't pause for pain, the schedule is the schedule. The show is the show, and then came the moment that stopped everything. It wasn't dramatic in the way you might expect. There was no public meltdown, no shocking headline, it was quieter than that. Almost more devastating because of it. During one of the later rounds, Matty stepped onto that stage, and something was visibly different. The fire that had made the country fall in love with him was still there, buried somewhere underneath. But what was on the surface looked less like passion and more like survival. Like a man performing not because he wanted to, but because he didn't know how to stop. The audience sensed it. The judges tread carefully. The internet, as it always does, had opinions. And then Matty did something that nobody in his position ever does. He told the truth, not through a publicist, not in a carefully worded post designed to control the narrative. He sat down and he talked about the anxiety, about the nights where sleep wouldn't come and the thoughts wouldn't stop, about what it feels like to be loved by thousands of strangers and still feel completely, utterly alone inside your own head. He talked about how the stage had once been the one place he felt safe, and how the show had slowly turned it into the most exposed and vulnerable place in the world. The response was immediate. Fans flooded his comments with love. Mental health organizations amplified his words. Young people across the country, people who had never touched a stage in their life, messaged him to say, "I didn't know anyone else felt like that." But the internal damage, that's not something that love from strangers fixes, and the competition continued, whether he was ready or not. When Matty's time on BGT finally came to an end, what the public was left with wasn't the story they'd been promised at the start. There was no triumphant win, no fairytale finale. No ribbon-wrapped moment of redemption that the show's producers could package and sell. What there was something rarer, something honest. Matty Juniosa had walked into Britain's Got Talent as a talented unknown. He walked out as something the industry wasn't quite prepared for, a mirror. A reflection of what it actually cost to stand in front of the world and feel something real. The conversations he started didn't end when the show did. They spread, they deepened. They reached people in places and situations that had nothing to do with singing competitions. But the question that lingered, the one that nobody in the industry was rushing to answer, was a simple one. Once the spotlight moves on, who takes care of the person left standing in the dark? Today, Matty Juniosa is still here, still creating, still speaking, still refusing to package his story into something neat and comfortable for the sake of an audience that wants easy answers. He talks about mental health not as a chapter that's behind him, but as something he continues to navigate. Honestly, without performance, he never got the fairytale. But what he got instead might actually matter more. A story that didn't require a trophy to be worth telling. A voice that doesn't need a competition to be worth hearing. Sometimes the most radical thing a person can do is simply refuse to disappear. And Matty Juniosa, he's still here, so here's what I want to know from you. Do you think talent shows like Britain's Got Talent actually take care of the people they put in the spotlight? Or do they take what they need and move on? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I genuinely read every single one. And if this story hit you somewhere real, if it made you feel something, then subscribe. Because this channel exists for exactly that. The stories behind the stories, the truths the industry doesn't rush to tell. The next one, you're going to want to be here for it.